The dying Texas sun painted the horizon in shades of blood and copper, casting long shadows across the parched earth. Dust devils danced between scattered mesquite trees, their thorny branches reaching toward the sky like desperate fingers. The wind carried the distant lowing of cattle and the acrid smell of drought-stricken land. Margaret Maggie Sullivan stood on the porch of her family's modest ranch house, shading her eyes against the glare. At 19, she had the lean build of someone who'd grown up working hard beneath an unforgiving sun. Her auburn hair, usually pinned neat, now hung loose around her shoulders, catching the evening light. Her calloused hands gripped the wooden railing as she surveyed what remained of their herd, barely 30 head where once there'd been over 100. "Maggie, supper's ready," her mother called from inside, her voice thin with exhaustion. "Coming, Ma?" But Maggie lingered, watching a lone rider approach on the dusty trail. Her hand moved instinctively to the Winchester propped against the doorframe, a habit formed in the 3 months since her father's death. The rider was Tom Bradley from the neighboring ranch. He tipped his hat as he drew near. "Evening, Miss Maggie. Thought you should know. There's been trouble up north. Comanche raiding party hit the Hendersons' place 2 days back." Maggie's jaw tightened. "Anyone hurt?" "Old man Henderson took an arrow to the shoulder, but he'll live. They lost some horses, though." Tom glanced toward the house, lowering his voice. "Folks in town are getting mighty nervous. Some are talking about forming a militia." "Let them talk," Maggie said flatly. "We've got enough troubles without borrowing more." Tom shifted in his saddle. "Your ma doing all right?" "Well, as can be expected." Maggie didn't elaborate. Her mother had taken to her bed more often than not since Samuel Sullivan was gunned down by bandits on the road from San Antonio. The fever that followed hadn't helped. "Thanks for the warning, Tom." After he left, Maggie secured the rifle and went inside. The small house felt smaller every day, just 3 rooms that held too many memories. Her younger brother Daniel, all of 14, sat at the rough-hewn table, wolfing down cornbread and beans. "Slow down, Danny. It's not going anywhere." Their mother, Ruth, said softly from her chair. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her hands trembled slightly as she lifted her coffee cup. Maggie served herself and sat down. Tom Bradley stopped by. "There's been Indian trouble north of here." Ruth's face paled further. "Lord help us, as if we didn't have enough to worry about." "We'll be fine. Ma, the ranch is too small to interest them." Maggie tried to sound confident, but worry gnawed at her. Their isolation, once a blessing, now felt like a curse. The nearest neighbor was 5 miles away. Town a full day's ride. "I can help patrol," Danny offered eagerly. "I'm a good shot now. Pa taught me—" "No." Maggie's voice was sharp. "You're needed here. Someone has to tend the cattle while I'm gone to town tomorrow." "You're going to town?" Ruth looked alarmed. "But if there's Indian trouble—" "We need supplies, Ma, and medicine for your fever." Maggie kept her voice gentle but firm. "I'll take the back trails. Avoid the main road. I'll be careful." That night, Maggie lay awake listening to the wind howl around the house. Through her small window, she could see stars scattered across the vast Texas sky like spilled salt. Somewhere out there, coyotes yipped and howled. Further still, she imagined Comanche warriors moving through the darkness, as much a part of this land as the wind and stone. She'd grown up on stories of Indian raids, had seen the burned homesteads and heard the survivors' tales, but lately, she'd begun to wonder about the other side of those stories. What did the Comanches see when they looked at ranches like theirs, spreading across land that had once been theirs alone? Rolling onto her side, Maggie tried to push away such thoughts. She had enough burdens without adding sympathy for the enemy. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. The 30-mile ride to Millbrook would be dangerous enough without dwelling on things she couldn't change. Dawn came too soon, painting the eastern sky pale pink. Maggie dressed in her father's old riding clothes, more practical than skirts for a hard ride. She saddled Dusty, their most reliable horse, and packed her saddlebags with careful precision. Water, hardtack, ammunition for both the rifle and the Colt revolver at her hip. "You be careful," Ruth whispered from the doorway, clutching a shawl around her thin shoulders. "Come back to us." "I will. Ma, keep Danny close. Bar the door at night." The morning air was cool, but Maggie knew the day would turn scorching before long. She guided Dusty onto the narrow trail that wound through limestone hills and dry creek beds. This route would add hours to her journey, but kept her away from the main road where bandits, and worse, might lurk. By noon, the sun beat down mercilessly. Maggie stopped to water Dusty at a small spring, one of the few that hadn't dried up completely. She splashed water on her face and refilled her canteen, always watching, always listening. The land here was harsh but beautiful in its severity. Prickly pear cactus bloomed with yellow flowers, and hawks circled overhead on thermal currents. For a moment, Maggie felt the wild freedom of it all, the vast openness that made a person feel both infinite and infinitely small. But freedom was a luxury she couldn't afford. There was medicine to buy. Flour and coffee if the general store had any. Ammunition, certainly. The small pouch of coins in her saddlebag represented their last savings. After this, she'd have to sell cattle, though who would buy them at fair price with drought gripping the land? As afternoon shadows lengthened, Maggie reached the outskirts of Millbrook. The town wasn't much. A main street lined with false front buildings, a church, a school, 2 saloons, and various shops. But after the isolation of the ranch, it felt almost overwhelming. She tied Dusty outside Morrison's general store and went in, blinking as her eyes adjusted to the dim interior. The familiar smells of coffee, leather, and gun oil greeted her. "Miss Maggie, Mr. Morrison nodded from behind the counter. "Heard about your troubles. Real sorry about your PA." "Thank you, Mr. Morrison. I need some supplies." She handed him her list, watching as he gathered items. "That medicine for your mom might be hard to come by," he said apologetically. "Doc Williams might have some, but he's been called out to the fort. Indian trouble has everyone on edge." "I heard—" Maggie counted out coins carefully. "Any word on what triggered the raids?" Morrison leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Cavalry pushed a band off their hunting grounds last month. Guess they decided to push back. Can't say I blame them entirely, but it don't make it any easier on folks like us caught in the middle." It was a surprisingly sympathetic view for a townsman. Maggie nodded thoughtfully as she packed her purchases. The medicine would have to wait for another trip, another risk. Outside, the late afternoon sun slanted across the dusty street. Maggie had just untied Dusty when she noticed a commotion near the saloon. A crowd had gathered, voices raised in anger. "String him up!" someone shouted. "Comanche spy!" Against her better judgment, Maggie moved closer. Through the crowd, she glimpsed a young Mexican man, hands bound, blood trickling from a cut on his cheek. His accusers were ranch hands she recognized, men who'd been drinking their courage all afternoon. "He was asking questions about the fort," one slurred. "Probably scouting for them savages." "Now hold on." Sheriff Barnes pushed through the crowd. "Asking questions ain't a crime. Miguel here has traded in this town for years. Times have changed. Sheriff, we can't trust none of them anymore." The ugly mood of the crowd made Maggie's skin crawl. This was how fear poisoned communities, turning neighbors into enemies. She thought of her father, who'd traded fairly with Mexican merchants and never had a harsh word for anyone based on their birth. As she mounted Dusty and headed out of town, Maggie couldn't shake the image of Miguel's frightened face. The West was changing, growing harder and meaner. Or perhaps it had always been this way. And she was only now old enough to see it clearly. The sun was setting by the time she reached the halfway point of her journey home. She'd have to ride the last miles in darkness. Dangerous. But she couldn't leave her mother and Danny alone overnight. Dusty picked his way carefully along the trail as stars emerged overhead. That's when she heard it. The distant sound of horses. Many horses moving fast. Maggie's heart pounded as she guided Dusty off the trail, into a cluster of rocks. She dismounted, hand on her rifle, straining to see in the gathering darkness. The hoofbeats grew louder, and then she saw them, Riders silhouetted against the stars, moving with deadly purpose. Comanche warriors, at least a dozen. Heading south toward the settlements, Maggie held her breath, pressing against Dusty to keep him quiet. The riders passed like ghosts, close enough that she could hear the creak of leather, the soft words in a language she didn't understand. Then they were gone, swallowed by the night. She waited long minutes before emerging, hands shaking as she mounted again. The warriors hadn't been painted for war, she realized. They'd looked more like a hunting party, or scouts. Either way, their presence this close to settled land meant trouble brewing. The rest of the ride home passed in tense silence. Every shadow could hide danger. Every sound might herald attack. When finally she saw the dim light of home in the distance, Maggie nearly wept with relief. "Thank the Lord," Ruth breathed as Maggie stumbled through the door. "I've been worried sick." As Maggie unpacked the supplies and told her family about the day, leaving out the encounter with the Comanche to spare her mother's nerves, she couldn't stop thinking about those riders in the darkness. They'd moved through their ancient lands like they belonged there, which of course they did. Tomorrow, she'd need to ride to the neighboring ranches, warn them about what she'd seen. But tonight, safe within these walls, Maggie allowed herself a moment to wonder what it would be like to ride free across the plains, answering to no one, bound by nothing but the wind and stars. It was a dangerous thought for a young woman with responsibilities, but as she banked the fire and prepared for bed, Maggie couldn't quite let it go. Somewhere out there in the vast Texas night, two worlds were colliding. She stood squarely in one of them, but for the first time in her life, she found herself curious about the other. The wind picked up outside, rattling the windows. Storm coming, maybe, or maybe just the restless spirit of the land itself, reminding everyone, settler and Comanche alike, that it belonged to no one and everyone all at once. The morning sun had barely crested the hills when Maggie set out again, this time heading west toward the Patterson Ranch to deliver her warning about the Comanche scouts. Her mother's cough had worsened overnight, and without the medicine from town, Maggie knew she'd have to try another settlement soon. Fort Stockton was 3 days' ride, but Doc Hartley there might have what Ruth needed. The trail wound through a narrow canyon, its walls still holding shadows from the night. Dusty's ears swiveled nervously, and Maggie kept her rifle across her saddle. Ready? These confined spaces made her uneasy. Too many places for ambush. She was halfway through the canyon when they struck. 3 men emerged from behind the rocks, bandanas covering their faces, guns drawn, white men by their builds and voices, though just as dangerous as any Comanche war party. Well, what have we here?" The leader's voice was rough with tobacco and whiskey. "Little girl playing cowboy?" Maggie's hand tightened on her rifle. "Let me pass. I've got no quarrel with you. But you've got supplies in them saddlebags, haven't you? And that's a fine horse." The man stepped closer. "Times are hard. Missy, we all got to eat." The other two spread out, trying to flank her. Maggie recognized the tactic. Her father had taught her well. She raised the Winchester, not quite pointing it at anyone yet. "I said let me pass. Or what? You'll shoot all 3 of us?" The leader laughed. "Put the gun down, girl. We'll just take what we need and—" The arrow that sprouted from his shoulder cut off his words. He screamed, spinning around as more arrows whistled through the air. His companions fired wildly into the rocks as Comanche warriors materialized from hiding spots Maggie hadn't even noticed. Dusty reared, nearly throwing her. She fought to control him as gunfire echoed off the canyon walls. One bandit fell with a tomahawk in his back. Another tried to run but was brought down by 2 warriors. The leader, still alive despite the arrow, raised his pistol toward Maggie, perhaps thinking she was part of the ambush. A tall figure dropped from the rocks above, tackling the bandit before he could fire. They rolled in the dust, fighting for the gun. It discharged once, the bullet sparking off stone, before the warrior's knife ended the struggle. Then, sudden silence except for Dusty's nervous stamping and Maggie's harsh breathing. The warrior who'd saved her rose slowly, wiping his blade on the dead man's shirt. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps in his mid-20s, with sharp cheekbones and intelligent dark eyes that studied her with mixture of curiosity and wariness, unlike the romanticized images from Eastern newspapers. He wore a practical mix of traditional and adapted clothing, buckskin leggings, a cotton shirt traded for Mexicans, his long black hair held back by a beaded band. He said something in Comanche, gesturing at her rifle. When she didn't respond, he tried Spanish. Baje el arma. I speak English, Maggie said, though she kept the Winchester ready. And I'm keeping my gun. A slight smile touched his lips. English. Then, you are not hurt? No. She glanced at the bodies of the bandits, trying not to show how shaken she was. They were trying to rob me. We know. We watched. He tilted his head, studying her. You are the woman from last night, on the trail. Maggie's blood chilled. You saw me. Swift Elk wanted to turn back. See why you hid? I said leave her. She is no threat. He paused. I was right? 6 more warriors emerged from the rocks. Young men all, armed with a mix of traditional weapons and stolen cavalry carbines. They spoke rapidly in their own language, gesturing at Maggie. She caught the tension in their voices, saw the way some fingered their weapons. The tall warrior, clearly their leader despite his youth, responded sharply, his tone brooking no argument. Then he turned back to her. Some say we should not let you go. You will bring soldiers. I won't. I have no love for the army. The words came out before Maggie could stop them. They did nothing when bandits killed my father. Interest flickered in his eyes. Your father is dead. 3 months ago. Those men, she gestured at the bodies, were cut from the same cloth. He was quiet for a moment, then spoke to his men again. The discussion grew heated. Finally, one warrior, older than the rest with scars marking years of battle, stepped forward and grabbed Dusty's reins. No! Maggie raised her rifle, but the leader held up his hand. Running Bear is right. We cannot let you go. Not yet. His English was careful but clear, learned probably from captives or traders. You will come with us. I have family waiting. My mother is sick. Then you should have stayed with her. But there was no cruelty in his voice, just stated fact. Get down. Maggie weighed her options. She was outnumbered, outgunned. Even if she managed to shoot 1 or 2, the others would overwhelm her. And this man had saved her life, even if unintentionally. She dismounted slowly, keeping her rifle. To her surprise, they didn't take it. The leader, she needed a name for him beyond the tall one, gestured for her to walk. Bring the horse, he told one of his men in English, perhaps for her benefit. They climbed out of the canyon by paths she never would have found. The war party moved with practiced silence, even leading horses. Maggie struggled to keep up, her riding boots poorly suited for climbing over rocks. When she stumbled, a strong hand caught her elbow. The leader steadied her, then let go quickly, as if the touch burned. You are not used to walking. I'm used to riding, like a normal person. That almost smile again. Horses are for speed, feet are for stealth. They climbed for what felt like hours, though the sun suggested it was less. Finally, they crested a ridge and Maggie saw the Comanche camp spread below in a hidden valley. It was smaller than she'd imagined, perhaps 30 lodges arranged in a rough circle, with horses grazing nearby and smoke rising from cooking fires. Children played between the teepees, their laughter carrying on the wind. Women worked at various tasks, scraping hides, tending fires, mending clothing. It looked so normal, domestic. Not the war camp of bloodthirsty savages she'd been taught to expect. Their arrival caused a stir. People emerged from lodges. Conversations stopped. An elderly woman with silver-streaked hair approached, speaking rapidly to the leader. Her eyes, when they fell on Maggie, were hard as flint. The leader responded patiently, but the woman's voice rose. She gestured at Maggie, then toward the south, toward the settlements. Other voices joined in, a mixture of anger, fear, and curiosity. She says you will bring death. The leader translated calmly. That all white women do, they come, and soldiers follow. Ah, I told you, I won't. What you intend matters little. What happens, that is beyond any of us. He looked tired suddenly, older than his years. Come, the council will decide. He led her to a larger lodge near the center. Inside, elderly men sat in a circle, pipes passing between them. The air was thick with smoke and tension. Maggie was made to sit, still clutching her rifle, while rapid discussion flowed around her. The leader spoke at length, gesturing occasionally toward her. She caught a few Spanish words mixed in, probably for concepts that had no Comanche equivalent. The elders listened, faces impassive, occasionally asking sharp questions. Finally, one ancient man with milky eyes spoke slowly, each word seeming to carry weight. The leader's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Then he turned to Maggie. You will stay 3 days. Then we will take you near your home, leave you where you can walk back safely. He paused. If soldiers come during those 3 days, you die first. This is the council's word. Maggie's mouth went dry. My family will worry. They'll search. No, they will assume you are dead, bandits or Indians. Makes no difference. They will mourn and go on. His voice softened slightly. This is better than the alternative. She was led to a small lodge at the camp's edge, guarded but not bound. An older woman brought her water and a bowl of stew that smelled of wild onions and rabbit. Maggie ate mechanically, mind racing. 3 days. Her mother needed medicine. Danny would try something foolish to find her. As sunset painted the sky, she sat at her lodge entrance, watching camp life unfold. The leader appeared, having traded his cotton shirt for decorated buckskin. He looked more traditionally Comanche now, more foreign. You never told me your name, Maggie said. He considered this. Names have power, but you may call me Joseph. At her surprised look, he added, mission schools. When I was young, before I understood what they were trying to steal from us? I'm Maggie, Margaret Sullivan. I know. We have watched your ranch since your father died. He sat cross-legged at a respectful distance. You work hard. Harder than most white women. Most white women haven't lost their fathers to murderers. No, most lose them to disease or drink or simple age. He pulled a stem of grass, twisting it between his fingers. We are not so different in loss. Why did you save me? From those bandits. Joseph looked toward the dying light. I did not. I stopped them from robbing our kills. You, he shrugged. You were there. Swift Elk would have let them have you. Then taken their goods after. But I remembered you from the trail. How you hid but did not run to warn soldiers. This showed wisdom. Or cowardice. Same thing. Sometimes. He stood. Rest. Tomorrow you will see we are not the monsters your people believe. Also not the noble savages some pretend. Just people, trying to survive in a world that no longer wants us. That night, Maggie lay on buffalo robes softer than any bed she'd known, listening to the camp settle into sleep. Somewhere, a woman sang a lullaby. A baby cried and was soothed. Dogs barked at something in the darkness. It was all so terribly human. She thought of Joseph, a mission school name covering whoever he truly was. His English spoke of education violently imposed, then rejected. His eyes held stories she couldn't begin to guess. When he'd steadied her on the rocks, his hand had been calloused like hers, worked hard by survival. 3 days. She'd lose 3 days while her mother grew sicker, while her family feared the worst. But she was alive, untied, still armed. The Comanche were taking a risk keeping her. Why? As sleep finally took her, Maggie realized she'd crossed some invisible line. Not just the physical boundary between settlements and Comanche territory, but something deeper. She'd seen the enemy's face and found it human. That, perhaps, was the most dangerous thing of all. Outside, drums began a soft rhythm. Not the war drums of imagination, but something sadder, older, the heartbeat of a people running out of room to run. Dawn came with the sound of children's laughter. Maggie woke disoriented, the unfamiliar surroundings slowly coming into focus. Through the lodge opening, she could see the camp stirring to life, women rekindling fires, men checking horses, children running between the teepees in some elaborate game. The older woman from yesterday appeared with fresh water and what looked like pemmican. She set them down without a word, but her eyes held less hostility than before. Perhaps curiosity was winning over suspicion. Maggie had just finished eating when Joseph appeared. In daylight, she could see a scar running along his jawline, an old wound that must have barely missed his throat. He carried himself with the controlled grace of someone always ready for danger. "Come," he said simply. "You will help with work." She followed him through the camp, aware of the stairs tracking her movement. Near the central fire, several women were working on a large hide, scraping away flesh with practiced strokes. Joseph spoke to them in Comanche, and while some looked skeptical, they made room for her. "You know this work?" he asked. "I've cleaned deer hides." Maggie accepted the scraping tool offered by a young woman about her age. "Though nothing this big. Buffalo. Rare now. The white hunters kill thousands for sport. Leave the meat to rot." His voice carried an edge of anger. "This one, we traveled far to find." Maggie set to work, falling into the rhythm of scraping. The women around her gradually relaxed, speaking among themselves. One, the young woman who'd given her the tool, tried a few words in Spanish. "Como te llamas?" "Maggie." "Y tú?" "Maria." She smiled shyly. "My grandmother was Mexican. Captured long ago. Became one of us." As the morning wore on, Maggie found herself drawn into the work's meditation, the repetitive motion, the soft chatter of women, the sun warming her back. It wasn't so different from working at the ranch. When she nicked her finger on a rough edge, Maria quickly produced a cloth to wrap it, clicking her tongue in sympathy. Joseph returned near midday. "You work well. This surprises them. Did you think white women just sat around fanning themselves? Some do. I have seen them in the towns, dressed like dolls, afraid of sun and work." He studied her bandaged finger. "You are bleeding." "It's nothing." He produced a small leather pouch, extracting what looked like crushed herbs. "Let me see." His touch was surprisingly gentle as he unwrapped the cloth. The cut wasn't deep, but he applied the herb paste anyway. It stung, then numbed. "This will help it heal clean. Infection is dangerous out here." "Thank you." The words came out softer than intended. Their eyes met for a moment before he stepped back, suddenly formal again. "The council wishes to speak with you again. Come." This time, the lodge held fewer elders, and the atmosphere was less tense. The ancient blind man from yesterday sat at the center, his clouded eyes somehow seeming to see right through her. He spoke at length, Joseph translating. "He says you have the hands of a worker, not a lady. This is good, but he wonders why you are not married. A woman your age should have children." Maggie felt heat rise in her cheeks. "My father needed my help with the ranch. There wasn't time for courting. And now he is dead. But still you do not seek a husband? My family needs me." The old man smiled, saying something that made the other elders chuckle. Joseph looked uncomfortable as he translated. "He says you are like our women, too stubborn for your own good. This is also good." The conversation shifted to questions about the settlements, the soldiers, the mood among the whites. Maggie answered honestly. The growing fear, the talk of militias, the way drought and hardship made people quicker to violence. "Some of my people say we should attack first," Joseph translated for a middle-aged elder with battle scars crossing his chest. "Strike before you grow stronger. What do you think?" "I think violence breeds more violence, on both sides." Maggie met the scarred elder's gaze. "My father traded fairly with everyone, white, Mexican, Indian. He's dead now, killed by white bandits. Violence doesn't care about the color of your skin." The elders discussed this among themselves. Finally, the blind man spoke again, his voice carrying finality. Joseph listened, his expression unreadable. He says you may move freely in the camp, but always with a guard. You may help with women's work if you choose. But remember, you are still prisoner. Do not try to leave. That afternoon, Maggie found herself by the horse herd with Maria, learning how the Comanche trained their mounts. These weren't the broken-spirited nags of town stables, but partners in survival. She watched a young boy no more than 8 ride bareback at full gallop, shooting arrows at a target with startling accuracy. All learn young, Maria explained. Horse and rider must be one. Where I come from, we start in saddles, with bits and reins. This is why your cavalry rides like sacks of grain, a new voice said in English. Swift Elk, the warrior who'd wanted to investigate her that first night, approached with barely concealed hostility. Slow, noisy, easy to kill. Swift Elk. Maria said something sharp in Comanche, but he ignored her. You should not be here. White woman. Joseph makes a mistake keeping you. The council decided, not Joseph. The council is old, living in the past. Joseph thinks because he learned your language, he understands your people. He does not. Swift Elk stepped closer. I understand. You are locusts, consuming everything. Nothing will satisfy until we are all dead or on your reservations. I never asked for any of this. I just wanted to warn the Pattersons about... She stopped, realizing her mistake. Warn them about us? Swift Elk smiled coldly. Yes, you care so much for your neighbors. Tell me, did you care when they pushed us from the good hunting grounds? When they killed the buffalo we needed for winter? That's enough. Joseph appeared, placing himself between them. The two men faced off, tension crackling. They spoke in rapid Comanche, voices rising. Others began to gather, sensing conflict. Finally, Swift Elk spat on the ground and stalked away. The crowd dispersed slowly, murmuring. Joseph turned to Maggie, anger clear in his eyes. You will stay away from him? I didn't seek him out. I know, but he speaks for many here, especially the young ones who see only war ahead. He ran a hand through his hair, disturbing the neat braids. Come, I will show you something. He led her up a rocky trail to a ledge overlooking the valley. From here, she could see for miles. The Comanche camp below, the endless stretch of plains beyond. The late afternoon sun painted everything gold. Beautiful, Maggie breathed. Yes, and shrinking. Joseph sat on a flat stone, gesturing for her to join him. Each year, the lands we can safely travel grow smaller. The buffalo disappear. The soldiers multiply like ants. Why are you telling me this? Because you asked why I saved you. He picked up a small rock, rolling it between his palms. When I was 12, soldiers came to our winter camp. We had done nothing, just camping where we always had. They killed 17 people. Women, children, my sister. He threw the rock hard, watching it arc into the void. I hated all whites after that, wanted only revenge. Then the mission school, forced learning. I hated more. But an old teacher there, Father Miguel, Mexican, not white, he taught me something. He said hate is like drinking poison and expecting your enemy to die. So you don't hate anymore? I hate what is being done, the lies, the broken treaties, the destruction. But people, he looked at her, people are complicated. You work hard, you grieve your father, you fear for your family. These are human things, not white things. They sat in comfortable silence as shadows lengthened. Maggie became aware of his proximity, the warmth radiating from him in the cooling air. When she shivered, he shifted slightly, blocking the wind. Your mother is sick, you said. Fever. It comes and goes, but each time leaves her weaker. I was trying to get medicine when your people found me. Our healers know fever. Perhaps. He shook his head. No, the council would never allow it. Allow what? Nothing. A foolish thought. He stood. We should return before dark. That night, there was dancing around the central fire. Maggie watched from her lodge entrance as men in elaborate dress performed what Maria explained were hunting dances, asking the spirits for success and safety. The drums seemed to echo her own heartbeat, primal and compelling. Joseph appeared beside her, now in simpler clothes. "You do not join? I wasn't invited?" "No, you would not be." He was quiet for a moment. "In 3 days, no, 2 now, you will go home. What will you tell them?" "I don't know. The truth. That you're people, not monsters. That you're fighting for survival, same as us." "They will not believe you." "Probably not. It might be better if you said we tortured you, threatened terrible things. Then they would not wonder why you lived." Maggie turned to look at him. "Is that what you want? More fear, more hate?" "I want my people to survive. Sometimes fear serves that better than understanding. And sometimes understanding prevents the need for fear." He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his face. "You sound like Father Miguel. He would have liked you." The dancing continued late into the night. Maggie dozed in her lodge, dreaming of drums and firelight. She woke once to find a blanket had been added to her bedding, though her guard claimed ignorance about who might have brought it. Near dawn, she woke again to urgent voices. Joseph entered without ceremony, his face grim. "Get up, soldiers are coming." Fear clenched her stomach. "How many? A full company? They will be here by midday." He grabbed her arm, pulling her outside where the camp was erupting in controlled chaos. "The council meets now. Your life hangs on their decision." As women began striking lodges and men prepared weapons, Maggie realized her 3 days had just run out early. Whatever growing understanding had begun between her and these people, particularly between her and Joseph, was about to be tested by the harsh reality of a world that allowed no space for such connection. The drums had stopped. In their place came the efficient sounds of a people preparing to run or fight. And somewhere in that chaos, her fate would be decided by elders who had every reason to see her as the enemy. The council met in haste as the camp dissolved around them. Women loaded travois with frightening efficiency, while warriors painted themselves for battle. Through the chaos, Joseph dragged Maggie to the central lodge where elders argued fiercely over her fate. Swift Elk's voice rose above the others, gesturing violently toward her. The blind elder sat silent, his weathered face turned toward the eastern sky as if he could see the approaching cavalry. When he finally spoke, the lodge fell silent. Joseph translated, his voice tight. "He says the spirits are testing us. You came to us by chance. Now soldiers come by choice. Perhaps one answers the other. Kill her and leave the body." Swift Elk snarled in English, wanting her to understand. "The soldiers will stop to bury their own. She is not theirs," Joseph countered. "And killing her solves nothing." The scarred elder from yesterday spoke at length, his words causing murmurs of agreement from some, sharp protests from others. Joseph's translation came in pieces. "He says, take you with us, use you as protection, soldiers less likely to attack with white woman visible." "As a shield," Maggie said flatly. "A human shield. Better than a corpse." The elder replied through Joseph, showing he understood more English than he'd revealed. The argument continued, but time was running short. Through the lodge opening, Maggie could see dust rising in the distance, cavalry approaching fast. Too fast. Someone had told them exactly where to look. The blind elder raised his hand for silence. He spoke slowly, each word measured. Joseph listened, his face cycling through surprise, concern, and something else. "Hope?" "Grandfather says." Joseph paused, choosing his words carefully. "He says the path divides here. One way leads to more blood, endless blood. The other is uncertain but holds possibility. You will come with us, but not as prisoner or shield, as messenger." "I don't understand." "Neither do I, fully, but Grandfather's visions have saved us before." Joseph stood. "We leave now. Can you ride as we ride?" "I can try." Outside, the camp had nearly vanished. Lodges packed, fires smothered. Only scattered debris suggesting people had ever lived here. Maria appeared with a spotted pony, pressing the lead rope into Maggie's hands. "Her name is Smoke," Maria said quickly. "She runs like wind. Trust her." There was no saddle, only a blanket and simple halter. Maggie had ridden bareback before, but never at the pace she suspected was coming. She mounted awkwardly, aware of Swift Elk's contemptuous gaze. Joseph swung onto his own mount with a liquid grace. "Stay close to me. No matter what happens, stay close." The band moved out in organized chaos, warriors flanking the women and children. Elderly mounted on the gentlest horses, perhaps 60 people total, Maggie realized. Not the vast horde of her imagination, but families running for their lives. They'd barely cleared the valley when the soldiers crested the ridge behind them. A bugle call split the air, followed by the thunder of pursuit. Joseph kicked his horse into a gallop, and Maggie clung desperately to Smoke's mane as the pony lurched forward. The Comanches scattered deliberately, groups peeling off in different directions. Joseph led a band of 20, mostly warriors, but some women and older children, toward a maze of canyons to the north. Maggie rode in their midst, her blonde hair visible even in the dust cloud they raised. Shots rang out behind them. A warrior cried out, clutching his shoulder but staying mounted. The canyons loomed ahead, promising shelter but also potential trap. Joseph shouted something, and half the warriors wheeled their horses, firing a volley back at the pursuers before racing to catch up. They plunged into the canyon system, hooves echoing off stone walls. Joseph led them through a bewildering series of turns, sometimes doubling back, sometimes squeezing through passages barely wide enough for horses. The sounds of pursuit grew fainter, soldiers struggling to follow the maze. Finally, Joseph raised his hand, bringing them to a halt in a wider section where several canyons met. Warriors immediately took defensive positions, while others tended the wounded man. Maggie slid from Smoke's back, legs shaking. "Drink." Joseph handed her a water skin. "We rest only minutes." She gulped water, trying to steady her nerves. "Where are the others? The families?" "Scattered. We will find them later, if—" He didn't finish. "Can you continue?" Before she could answer, a lookout whistled sharply. Dust rose from 2 directions. The soldiers had split up, trying to box them in. Joseph cursed in Comanche, then English. "This way!" He grabbed Smoke's lead, pulling Maggie along. "There's a place, difficult to reach but defensible. We make our stand there." They climbed higher into the rocks, horses struggling on the steep path. Behind them, gunfire erupted as the rearguard engaged the soldiers. The wounded warrior, Running Wolf. She'd heard him called, gritted his teeth as each jolt sent pain through him. The path ended at a natural fortress, a flat area surrounded by high rocks with only one narrow approach. A small spring trickled from a crack in the stone, forming a pool. Warriors immediately took positions among the rocks while Joseph helped Running Wolf down. "Let me see," Maggie said, moving to the wounded man. Joseph started to protest, but she was already examining the shoulder. "The bullet went through clean. That's good." She tore strips from her underskirt, packing the wound as her father had taught her after a hunting accident. Running Wolf watched her with surprised eyes, but didn't pull away. Swift Elk spat something that sounded like a curse, but even he couldn't argue with medical aid. The soldiers arrived as she finished. They spread out below, a blue line against red rock. A voice called up. "Colonel Harrison," Maggie recognized. She'd met him once at a town social. "Release the white woman, and we'll discuss terms." Joseph looked at her. "He assumes you are captive." "I was—" And now, before she could answer, Swift Elk grabbed her arm, hauling her to the edge where she'd be visible. "Here is your woman," he shouted in accented English. "Come get her!" Shots immediately rang out from below, soldiers assuming threat. Swift Elk jerked Maggie back as bullets whined off stone. Joseph tackled Swift Elk, both men rolling dangerously close to the drop. Warriors pulled them apart, everyone shouting at once. "Enough," Maggie pushed between them. "I'll talk to Harrison. Maybe I can—" "Can what?" Swift Elk snarled. "Tell him we are good Indians, that we mean no harm, while they steal our land and kill our buffalo? I can try to prevent more killing, today, at least." Joseph studied her face. "What would you say?" The truth, that you rescued me from bandits, that you treated me well, that you want only to be left in peace. Pretty lies, Swift Elk said. They want us dead or on reservations. Nothing else. Then we die here? Maggie looked around at the warriors. Some so young they barely had whiskers. That proves what? The blind elder's words came back through Joseph. The path divides here. She moved to the edge, hands raised. Colonel Harrison, it's Margaret Sullivan. Miss Sullivan, are you hurt? No, these people saved me from bandits. They've treated me with kindness. Silence from below. Then Harrison's voice, skeptical. They're holding you against your will. They were protecting me. Colonel, please, there doesn't need to be bloodshed. That's not your decision, miss. Tell them to surrender, and no one gets hurt. Swift Elk laughed bitterly. Yes, surrender. Like Black Kettle surrendered at Sand Creek before they slaughtered his people. Joseph moved beside Maggie. What do you think happens if we surrender? She knew. Reservation at best. Likely worse. These warriors would be tried for raiding, regardless of truth. The women and children, wherever they'd scattered to, would be rounded up like cattle. I won't lie to you, she said quietly. But maybe I can buy time for the families to get farther away. Joseph considered this, then called down in English. We will send the woman down. In exchange, you withdraw to the canyon mouth. Let us tend our wounded. Murmurs from below. Then Harrison again. Send her down first. Your word as officer. You have it. Swift Elk grabbed Joseph's arm. You cannot trust them. I trust her. Joseph looked at Maggie with something deep in his eyes. She goes down, speaks truth. Maybe they listen, maybe not, but the families need time. He walked her to where the path began its descent. If they keep you, and they will, remember us as we are, not devils or saints, just people trying to live. Joseph, she wanted to say something, anything, but words failed. Instead, she touched his hand briefly. I'll try, I promise I'll try. He squeezed her fingers once, then let go. Be careful. Margaret Sullivan. The world is harsh to those who stand between. She picked her way down the path, aware of guns trained from both directions. Halfway down, she turned for one last look. Joseph stood at the edge, watching. Behind him, Swift Elk had his rifle ready, expecting betrayal. The wounded running wolf had propped himself up, adding his eyes to those tracking her descent. Then she was among the soldiers. Colonel Harrison gripping her arm, pulling her behind their lines. Thank God, miss, your family's been worried sick. Colonel, please, those men aren't what you think. We'll discuss it later. Sergeant, escort Miss Sullivan to safety. No! She struggled against the sergeant's grip. Colonel, I gave my word. You said you'd withdraw. Harrison looked at her with paternal condescension. Miss Sullivan, you've been through an ordeal. These savages have clearly affected your thinking. They saved my life. And now we're saving theirs, if they're smart enough to surrender. He turned away. Lieutenant, prepare the men. If they don't come down in 10 minutes, we go up. Maggie watched in horror as soldiers checked weapons, prepared for assault. She'd been naive to think her word carried any weight here. Above, the Comanche would see the betrayal, would prepare to die rather than yield. That's when the storm hit. It came from nowhere, as plain storms do, a wall of dust and wind that turned day to dusk. Thunder crashed overhead as the sky opened, releasing torrents of rain that turned the canyon floor into a rushing stream. In the chaos of wind and water, Maggie heard gunfire from above, saw muzzle flashes in the gloom. The soldiers struggled to keep formation as horses panicked and visibility dropped to nothing. When the storm passed as suddenly as it came, the rocks above were empty. The Comanche had vanished like smoke, leaving only spent shells and blood on stone to prove they'd ever been there. Colonel Harrison raged about Apache tactics and cowardly escapes, but Maggie saw the relief in some soldiers' faces. Young men who joined for regular pay, not to hunt other human beings through maze-like canyons. They found her horse Dusty, wandering near where the bandits had died. No sign of the bodies. The Comanche had dealt with them somehow. The ride back to civilization felt like a dream. Maggie swaying in her saddle, exhausted beyond measure, but she kept her promise. At the fort, to Harrison and his superiors, she told the truth, how the Comanche had saved her from bandits, how they'd treated her with dignity, how they wanted only to be left alone on what remained of their lands. They listened politely and ignored every word. The report would read, "Hostile Indians" and "Captive white woman." The pursuit would continue. The path had divided, as the blind elder said, but both directions led through blood. That night, in a hard cot in the fort's infirmary, Maggie dreamed of Joseph's eyes in firelight, of Maria's shy smile, of the wounded running wolf letting her tend him despite every reason for distrust. She dreamed of drums and stars and freedom she'd never known existed until she'd seen it slipping away. She woke to find a small bundle on the floor by her cot, her father's rifle, cleaned and oiled, and a beaded band like the one Joseph wore in his hair. No one could say how it got there, but Maggie knew. Somewhere out there, despite betrayal and storm, someone remembered a promise to return her belongings, someone who moved through the world like smoke and shadow, leaving only questions in his wake. The path had divided, but perhaps, in some future she couldn't yet see, it might converge again. For now, she had a sick mother to tend, a ranch to run, a life to rebuild, but she would not forget. The beaded band, hidden beneath her pillow, would make sure of that. The weeks after Maggie's return blurred together in a haze of worried looks and whispered conversations. Her mother's fever had worsened during her absence, and Danny had aged years in days, trying to hold the ranch together alone. Neither questioned her story about escaping from bandits. They were too grateful to have her back. But the nights were hard. Maggie would lie awake, fingering the beaded band hidden beneath her pillow, remembering Joseph's eyes as he'd let her go. Sometimes she'd hear drums in the wind, only to realize it was her own heartbeat. The army increased patrols after the canyon incident. Twice, soldiers stopped by the ranch, asking if she'd seen any Indian sign. She told them no, hating the lie but hating more what truth would bring. The young lieutenant who led the second patrol lingered, clearly taken with her, but Maggie felt only emptiness when he smiled. Then came the night that changed everything. She woke to Dusty's frantic whinnying. Grabbing her rifle, she crept to the window. A figure stood by the corral, tall, still, familiar. Her heart hammered as she slipped outside. Joseph emerged from the shadows, but this wasn't the proud warrior she remembered. His face was drawn with exhaustion. Dried blood stained his shirt, and he swayed slightly on his feet. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, even as she moved toward him. "I know," his voice was rough, "but I had nowhere else." He stumbled, and she caught him, feeling the fever burning through his skin. "You're hurt. Soldiers, 3 days ago. Swift Elk is dead. Many others." He tried to pull away. "I should not have come. You risk too much." "Hush." She supported his weight, guiding him toward the barn. "Can you make it?" Inside, she lit a single lantern, keeping it low. In its light, she saw the bullet wound in his side, inflamed and seeping. Her hands shook as she fetched water and her medical supplies. "This will hurt," she warned, beginning to clean the wound. He gritted his teeth but made no sound as she worked. The bullet was still lodged, too deep for her skills. "You need a real doctor. No doctor will treat me." He caught her hand. "Maggie, Margaret, why do you help me?" She met his gaze, seeing her own confusion reflected there. "I don't know. I can't not help you." Something shifted in his expression. Despite pain and fever, he reached up, fingers barely brushing her cheek. "That day in the canyon, you tried to make peace. No white woman has done this before. It didn't work. You tried. That matters." She finished bandaging the wound, knowing it wasn't enough. He needed rest, medicine, proper care, none of which she could provide without revealing his presence. "You can't stay here. If they find you—" "I know. At dawn." I go. You'll die out there. Perhaps. But I will not bring death to you. She made him as comfortable as possible in the hay, bringing blankets and food. He ate little, the fever sapping his appetite. As she turned to leave, he spoke softly. The families made it to Mexico. Maria asked me to thank you. She said your kindness gave her hope. Tears stung Maggie's eyes. I'm glad they're safe. Safe for now. But Mexico has its own troubles with the Comanche. Nowhere is truly safe anymore. He closed his eyes. Sometimes I think Swift Elk was right. We should have fought to the last man. Don't say that. Why? Because it makes you sad. There was no cruelty in the words, just weary truth. Your people will write the history. We will be the villains who stood in the way of progress. No one will remember that we laughed, loved, raised our children, that we were people. I'll remember. He opened his eyes, studying her face. Yes, I believe you will. She stayed with him through the night, bathing his fever, holding water to his lips. Somewhere in the darkest hours, his control broke. He spoke in Comanche, words she didn't understand but recognized as names. Swift Elk, Running Wolf, others who must be gone. She held his hand, offering what comfort she could. Near dawn, the fever broke. He woke clearer-eyed, though still weak. I must go. You can barely stand. Staying means death for both of us. He struggled upright, accepting her help with visible reluctance. There is a place, a cave, 2 hours north, hidden. I can rest there. I'll come with you. No, just to the cave, to make sure you make it. She saw him about to protest and added, Please, let me do this one thing. He considered, then nodded. She saddled Dusty and helped Joseph mount, climbing up behind him to keep him steady. They rode in pre-dawn darkness, following paths she'd never have found alone. The cave was well hidden, screened by brush and fallen rocks. Inside, evidence of past use, cached supplies, blankets, the remains of old fires. She helped him to a bed of furs, checking his bandage. I'll bring medicine, she said. Food. Check on you. No. He caught her hands. This is goodbye, Maggie. Your wound. We'll heal or not, but you cannot keep coming. They watch you now. I've seen the patrols. His thumbs traced her knuckles. You have done more than anyone could ask. I haven't done anything. I couldn't stop the killing. Couldn't make them see. You saw. That is everything. He pulled her closer, and suddenly she was aware of his warmth, his scent of leather and sage, the way his eyes held depths she wanted to drown in. In another world. Don't. Why? Because it is impossible. Everything about us is impossible. Yet, here we are. The space between them disappeared. The kiss was desperate, tender, tasting of endings and might-have-beens. She clung to him, memorizing the feeling, knowing it would have to last a lifetime. When they parted, both were breathing hard. Go, he whispered. Before the sun rises, before I forget why you must leave. She went, vision blurred with tears, at the cave mouth. She turned back. He sat watching her, memorizing her as she had him. I love you, she said, the words escaping before wisdom could stop them. His face crumpled briefly before reassembling into stoic lines. And I love you. Now go, live, be happy. Forget the foolish warrior who dreamed of impossible things. She rode home as the sun painted the sky, feeling hollowed out. But life didn't stop for broken hearts. There were cattle to tend, meals to cook, her mother's medicine to fetch from town. Days passed. She fought the urge to return to the cave, knowing Joseph was right about the watchers. Soldiers came by more frequently, their questions more pointed. Had she seen anything unusual? Any Indians? The lieutenant from before pressed his suit, encouraged by her mother who saw security in a military marriage. 2 weeks after the cave, news came that shattered her fragile composure. A Comanche warrior had been captured, wounded, near the border. He was being held at Fort Stockton pending trial for raids he may or may not have participated in. The description matched Joseph. That night, Maggie made her choice. She packed carefully, medical supplies, food that would travel, ammunition. She left a note for her mother, knowing it was inadequate but unable to find better words. At midnight, she saddled Dusty and rode out, the beaded band now worn openly in her hair. The storm that had saved Joseph's band before seemed like a lifetime ago. But Maggie had learned something from it, that sometimes chaos provided opportunity, that rigid plans shattered against fluid reality. She would find him, free him if possible, die trying if necessary. Because Swift Elk had been wrong about one thing. Some things mattered more than survival. Some connections transcended the boundaries others built, and some loves, impossible though they might be, were worth any risk. The fort lay ahead, torches flickering on its walls, somewhere within. Joseph waited, for trial, for execution, for rescue. Maggie checked her weapons, said a prayer to any god that might listen to a woman caught between worlds, and rode on. The path had divided. Now she would forge a new one, or die in the attempt. Either way, she would not let him face the darkness alone. Not again. Not while her heart still beat and her hands could still hold a gun. In the distance, a coyote howled, or perhaps it was a signal from Comanche scouts. Maggie smiled grimly. Let them come, soldier and warrior alike. She was done being caught in the middle. Tonight, she chose a side. She chose love. Fort Stockton loomed in the darkness, its walls a barrier between worlds. Maggie circled wide, studying the patterns of sentries, the placement of torches. The main guardhouse sat near the center. That's where they'd hold a captured warrior awaiting trial. She'd prepared for this, trading her father's gold watch to a Mexican trader for information. The man's cousin worked in the fort's stables and had drawn her a rough map. Joseph was indeed here, wounded but alive, held in chains pending transport to San Antonio for trial. Near dawn, opportunity came. A supply wagon approached the gates, driven by civilians contracted to deliver goods. Maggie had hidden in the scrub brush, waiting. As the wagon slowed for inspection, she slipped underneath, clinging to the axles. The ride through the gates left her arms screaming. But she held on until the wagon stopped near the quartermaster's building. Rolling free, she ducked behind water barrels, heart pounding. The fort was stirring to life, soldiers heading to morning drill, cooking fires being lit. She pulled a worn shawl over her head, hunching her shoulders. Just another laundress or camp follower, invisible in the morning routine. The guardhouse was newer construction, solid adobe with barred windows. 2 soldiers stood watch, looking bored. Maggie waited. Patience learned from weeks of stalking deer with her father. When one guard left to relieve himself, she moved. The remaining soldier barely had time to turn before her rifle butt connected with his temple. He crumpled silently. She dragged him into shadows, took his keys. Inside, the smell hit her, unwashed bodies. Waste, despair. 3 cells lined the wall. In the furthest, a figure sat motionless. "Joseph," she whispered. His head snapped up, eyes widening in disbelief. "Maggie, no, you cannot be here." "Hush!" She fumbled with keys, hands shaking. The lock clicked open. Joseph stood slowly, chains clanking. He was thinner. The wound in his side barely healed, but his eyes burned with familiar fire. "You beautiful fool," he breathed. "Why? You know why." She worked on his shackles. "Can you ride?" "I can fly if it means leaving here." The chains fell away. He rubbed his wrists, then cupped her face. "They will hunt us, both of us, forever. Let them hunt." Shouts erupted outside. The guard had been discovered. Joseph grabbed a pistol from the guard station. "Which way?" "Follow me." They burst from the guardhouse as soldiers converged. Joseph fired, scattering them, buying seconds. Maggie led him between buildings, following her memorized route to where she'd hidden horses, Dusty, and a stolen cavalry mount. "Stop them!" Colonel Harrison's voice roared across the compound. Bullets whined past as they reached the horses. Joseph vaulted onto the cavalry mount despite his weakness. They spurred toward the gates, now being swung shut. "Down!" Joseph shouted. They lay flat on their horses' necks as rifle fire erupted. The gates loomed, closing, closing. They burst through with inches to spare, wood splintering around them. Behind, bugle calls split the morning. The pursuit would come fast, but Maggie had planned for this too. She led Joseph hard west, toward Badlands she'd scouted, terrain that would slow horses and break formations. They rode without speaking, saving breath and strength. After an hour, she glanced back to see dust clouds, at least a dozen riders. Joseph swayed in his saddle but stayed mounted through sheer will. The Badlands opened before them, a maze of arroyos, steep-sided washes, and crumbling stone. Maggie picked a path between obstacles, choices made by instinct and desperation. Behind, shouts indicated the soldiers were spreading out, trying to flank them. "There," Joseph pointed to a narrow canyon. "I know this place." They plunged in, horses struggling on loose stone. The canyon twisted, branched, twisted again. Joseph took the lead now, memory guiding where Maggie's planning ended. They climbed a treacherous path to higher ground, horses laboring. At the top, Joseph dismounted, peering back. "They follow, but slowly. We have time." "Time for what?" He looked at her with infinite sadness. "To say goodbye properly." "No, we keep running. Mexico isn't far." "Maggie." He caught her hands. "Look at me. I am weak, hunted. You are white, young, with family. This path leads only to death. Then I choose death with you over life without. I cannot let you—" She kissed him fiercely, silencing protests. When they parted, she kept her forehead pressed to his. "You don't get to let me or not let me. I choose this. I choose you." His control shattered. He pulled her against him, holding tight as if he could merge their souls through will alone. "I have dreamed of you," he whispered. "Every night in that cell. Your eyes, your strength. You kept me alive. Then let me keep you alive now." Hoofbeats echoed from below, the soldiers navigating the canyon. Joseph straightened, warrior instincts overriding emotion. There is another way, difficult but possible. He studied the terrain. "Can you climb?" She nodded. He led her to where the canyon wall was broken, offering handholds. They had to leave the horses, no choice. Joseph went first, testing each hold despite his weakness. Maggie followed, rifle strapped to her back, trying not to think of the drop below. Halfway up, Joseph's strength failed. He clung to the rock face, trembling. Maggie climbed beside him, letting him lean on her. "Just a little further. Go without me." "Never." Together they inched upward. Below, soldiers entered the wider area where they'd abandoned the horses. Shouts of discovery, then frustration as they realized their quarry had climbed beyond horse pursuit. The top was a narrow plateau, wind-scoured and desolate. Joseph collapsed, breathing hard. Maggie scanned for shelter, seeing a cluster of rocks that might hide them. She half-carried him there, both falling behind the largest boulder. "We need to keep moving," she said. "In a moment." He was pale, sweat beading his forehead. The escape had cost him dearly. "Maggie, there is something I must tell you." "Later." "No, now. While I have strength." He gripped her hand. "My people, what remains of them, shelter in Mexico, in the Sierra Madre, a village called Refugio. If something happens to me, nothing will happen. Listen, please." His urgency silenced her. "Find them. Tell them I died free. That matters to them. To me." "You're not dying." He smiled weakly. "Not today, perhaps. But this wound, the weakness, I am not the warrior I was. I don't need a warrior. I need you. And you have me, for whatever time the spirits grant." He touched the beaded band in her hair. "You kept this." "Of course. It was my sister's. She would have liked you, stubborn, brave, foolish." His eyes grew distant. "She was 14 when the soldiers came. Beautiful, full of life. He stopped, jaw clenching. You don't have to tell me. Yes, I do. You should know why I fight, why I cannot simply disappear into your world. He steadied himself. They did things to her. Many men. She lived 3 days after, then walked into the Winter River. The cold took her gently. She said, gentler than they were. Maggie held him as he shook with old grief. Below, she could hear soldiers attempting the climb, cursing as rocks gave way. They had minutes, maybe less. I'm sorry, she whispered. So sorry. She came to me in dreams while I was captive, told me to let go of hate, to find another way. He looked at Maggie with wonder. Then you came, like she sent you. A bullet spanged off nearby rock. The soldiers had managed to climb high enough to fire. Joseph rolled aside, pulling Maggie with him. We run now. They fled across the plateau, using rocks for cover. The sun climbed higher. Heat building, behind. At least 4 soldiers had made the climb, spreading out to cut off escape routes. There! Joseph pointed to where the plateau ended in another drop. Trust me. They reached the edge. Below, a slope of loose shale descended to another canyon system. Dangerous but survivable. Joseph went first, half sliding, half falling. Maggie followed, rifle banging against her back. The shale gave way in a minor avalanche. They tumbled, Joseph trying to shield her, both crying out as rocks tore clothes and skin. They landed hard at the bottom, winded and bleeding. Can you stand? Joseph asked, though he could barely manage it himself. She nodded, spitting dirt. Above, soldiers appeared at the edge, but the shale slide had made the route treacherous. They'd have to find another way down. Hand in hand, Joseph and Maggie stumbled deeper into the canyon maze. Each step was agony, but they pushed on, driven by love and desperation. The sun reached its zenith, heat becoming an enemy as cruel as their pursuers. In a shallow cave, they finally collapsed. Joseph's wound had reopened, blood seeping through his shirt. Maggie used their precious water to clean it, tearing more of her underthings for bandages. You're burning up again. The fever comes and goes. It will pass. She knew he was lying, but said nothing. Outside, the canyon was silent. Their pursuers had lost them for now, but it was temporary reprieve. Come morning, the search would widen. Trackers would be brought in. Sleep, she told him. I'll keep watch. Maggie, sleep, that's an order. He smiled at that, closing his eyes. She held his hand as his breathing deepened, memorizing his face in the filtered light. Whatever came next, Mexico, death, capture, she regretted nothing. Love had brought her here, and love would see it through. As shadows lengthened, she heard it, horses, many horses, moving through the canyon, not soldiers' mounts. She realized these horses moved differently, their riders one with them. Comanche. She woke Joseph gently. He listened, then called out softly in his language. Silence. Then an answering call. Warriors materialized from the rocks, survivors from other bands. She guessed. Hard-faced men who looked at her with suspicion until Joseph spoke rapidly, gesturing. One, older with gray in his hair, finally nodded. He said something that made Joseph sag with relief. They will take us to Mexico. He translated. To the others. But Maggie. He searched her eyes. Once you cross, there is no returning. You will be fugitive forever. She thought of her mother, her brother, the ranch, the life she'd known, the future she'd assumed. Then she looked at Joseph, wounded, hunted, but still the strongest man she'd ever known. Not in body anymore, but in spirit, in conviction, in love. Then we'd better cross quickly, she said. He kissed her forehead, murmuring something in Comanche. A blessing, perhaps, or a promise. The warriors provided horses, and they mounted with difficulty as they rode deeper into the wild lands. Maggie looked back once at the world she was leaving. No regrets, only hope that somewhere beyond borders and boundaries, two people who should never have met might find peace together, The impossible made possible by the simple, terrible, beautiful fact of love. The journey to Mexico tested them both. Joseph's fever returned with vengeance, leaving him barely conscious in the saddle. Maggie rode beside him, one hand steadying him, the other holding her rifle. The Comanche warriors, she'd learned their leader was called Gray Wolf, watched her with grudging respect as she tended Joseph during their brief stops. They traveled at night, resting in hidden places during the day. On the third night, as they neared the border, Joseph's condition worsened. He burned with fever, muttering in delirium, sometimes in Comanche, sometimes her name. "He needs medicine," Maggie told Gray Wolf, who understood more English than he let on. "Real medicine, or he'll die." The older warrior studied her, then spoke to his men. After heated discussion, he turned back. "There is a Mexican trader, 2 hours' ride. He has helped us before." "I'll go. You are white. They look for you. They look for us together, alone. I might pass unnoticed." She met his skeptical gaze steadily. "I won't abandon him." Gray Wolf considered, then nodded. He detailed 2 young warriors to guide her, keeping Joseph and the others hidden in a box canyon. Maggie kissed Joseph's burning forehead, whispering promises to return, then rode out into the darkness. The trading post sat at a crossroads, adobe walls glowing pale in moonlight. Maggie left the warriors hidden, approaching alone. Inside, oil lamps cast dancing shadows. The trader, a grizzled Mexican named Rodrigo, looked up warily from behind his counter. "Señorita, I need medicine. For fever. Infection." She placed silver on the counter, the last of her money. "And bandages." His eyes narrowed, taking in her torn clothes, the beaded band in her tangled hair. "You ride with Indios." It wasn't a question. Maggie's hand moved to her pistol, but Rodrigo raised his hands peacefully. "Peace, señorita. I judge no one. The Comanche trade fair with me." He gathered supplies. A bottle of laudanum, willow bark, clean cloth. "Your man, he is hurt bad." "Yes, this will help. But he needs rest, good food, time to heal." He pushed the silver back. "No payment. The one called Joseph saved my nephew from banditos last year. This is debt repaid." Relief weakened her knees. "Thank you. There is more. Rangers were here yesterday, asking about a white woman riding with Comanche. They say she murdered a guard, stole horses." His eyes were kind but worried. "They offer much gold for information. And I'm old and blind, see nothing." He smiled. "But others have sharper eyes. Yes, be careful. Señorita, love makes us brave but also foolish." She rode back with the precious medicine, finding the band anxious. Joseph was worse, skin hot and dry, barely responsive. Maggie forced laudanum between his lips, made willow bark tea, changed his bandages with gentle hands. The wound was angry red but not putrid. Hope remained. "Will he live?" Gray Wolf asked bluntly. "I don't know, but I won't let him die without a fight." They resumed travel before dawn, Joseph tied to his horse to keep him mounted. The border was close, that invisible line that meant safety for some, danger for others. As the sun rose, they saw the Rio Grande glinting like a snake through the desert, but they also saw dust clouds. Riders approaching from 2 directions, Rangers from the north, Mexican cavalry from the south. They were trapped on a slight rise. Nowhere to run. "Fight?" one warrior asked Gray Wolf. "Too many. We die. Achieve nothing." The leader looked old, tired. Then his eyes fell on Maggie. "Unless..." "What?" "You go to them. Say we forced you. They take you back. We escape across river." "No, it is logical. You are white, young. They will believe." "I said no." She checked her rifle, counted ammunition. "We fight together or not at all?" Joseph stirred, eyes focusing with effort. "Maggie? I'm here." He saw the approaching riders, understood immediately. "Gray Wolf is right. You must. If one more person tells me what I must do, I'll shoot them myself." She positioned herself beside him. "Now, can you fire a gun or not?" "Despite everything," he smiled. "You are impossible, woman." You're just figuring that out? The Rangers arrived first, spreading in a half circle. Colonel Harrison led them, face grim. He called out, "Miss Sullivan, release her and we'll discuss terms." Grey Wolf looked at her. She shook her head firmly. "Miss Sullivan, your mother is beside herself. Your brother searches every day. Come home." The words hit harder than bullets. Danny, searching, her mother, already weak, now grieving. But Maggie looked at Joseph, saw the resignation in his eyes. He expected her to go, to choose her old life. Instead, she stood in her stirrups, voice carrying clear. "I'm not a prisoner. Colonel, I choose to be here." Murmurs from the Rangers. Harrison's face darkened. "Then you leave us no choice. Surrender now, all of you, or—" The Mexican cavalry arrived, their captain calling out in Spanish. Grey Wolf translated quietly. "He says this is Mexican soil. The Rangers have no authority, but neither do we. He wants us all to surrender." Three forces faced each other across dusty ground, tension crackling. Any moment, someone would fire, and blood would flow. Maggie felt Joseph sway beside her, his strength nearly gone. Then she remembered Rodrigo's words. "Love makes us brave, but also foolish." Perhaps it was time for foolishness. She spurred her horse forward, into the space between all parties. Rifles swung toward her from every direction, but she raised empty hands. "I have something to say." "Maggie, no," Joseph called weakly. She ignored him, addressing all three groups. "You want to know what happened? The truth? I fell in love. That's my crime. This man," she gestured to Joseph, "saved my life. And yes, I helped him escape, because I'd rather be a criminal with him than respectable without him." "Miss Sullivan," Harrison's voice held warning. "You're clearly disturbed. Come with us, and—" "I'm not disturbed. Colonel, I'm finally clear." She looked at the Mexican captain. "Capitan, we ask only for passage. We'll cause no trouble in your country." The captain was young, perhaps romantic. Something in her plea touched him. He spoke with his sergeant, then called out in accented English. "This is a complicated situation. No, perhaps. If the señorita and her companions were to cross the river quickly, while I investigate these Rangers illegally on Mexican soil." Harrison's face went purple. "Now see here. You are in Mexico. Señor, without permission. This is serious breach." "No?" While the two officers argued jurisdiction, Grey Wolf understood. He barked orders, and the Comanche began moving toward the river. Maggie returned to Joseph, supporting him as their horses entered the shallow water. "Maggie Sullivan," Harrison roared. "If you cross that river, you can never come back. You'll be wanted for murder, horse theft, aiding enemies of the state. Think of your family." She paused midstream, water swirling around her horse's legs. Her old life stood on one bank. Her new one beckoned from the other. No middle ground remained. "Tell my family I love them," she called back. "Tell them I'm sorry, but tell them I'm free." They completed the crossing as the argument escalated behind them. On Mexican soil. Grey Wolf led them quickly away from the river, into hills that promised shelter. Behind them, Harrison's curses faded with distance. Joseph slumped against her, finally safe enough to let unconsciousness take him. Maggie held him upright, whispering prayers to any god that might listen. They'd crossed more than a river. They'd crossed into a new existence, uncertain and dangerous, but theirs to shape. By evening, they reached the Comanche refuge in the Sierra Madre foothills. It was smaller than she'd expected, maybe 40 souls, mostly women, children, and elderly. The warriors who could still fight were few. Maria rushed forward when she saw them, tears streaming. She helped lower Joseph from his horse, chattering rapidly in a mix of Comanche and Spanish. Others gathered, suspicious of Maggie at first. Then, accepting as Grey Wolf explained, they carried Joseph to a shelter where an ancient woman waited, their healer. She examined him with gentle hands, then spoke at length to Maria, who translated for Maggie. "Grandmother says the fever has gone deep, but his spirit is strong. She will do what she can, but—" Maria hesitated. "She says he fights for something beyond himself, for you." This gives him power but also drains him. You understand? Maggie nodded, throat tight. She was allowed to stay as the healer worked, applying poultices, burning herbs that filled the air with pungent smoke. Joseph drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes calling for her, sometimes for the dead. 3 days passed in a blur of hope and fear. Maggie barely left Joseph's side, helping the healer, learning without words what each gesture meant. The village slowly accepted her presence. She worked hard, asked for nothing, showed respect for their ways. On the 3rd night, Joseph's fever finally broke for good. He woke clear-eyed, weak but himself. Seeing Maggie beside him, he reached out wonderingly. You stayed. Where else would I go? Your family are safe. They'll mourn, then move on. The ranch will survive or not. But I made my choice. She gripped his hand. No regrets. He studied her face, seeing the exhaustion, the determination, the love. You gave up everything? No, I gained everything that matters. He pulled her down beside him, holding her close despite his weakness. They lay together in the dim shelter, listening to night sounds, children laughing, dogs barking, life continuing despite all odds. It will be hard, he murmured. You will always be between worlds, never fully accepted by either. Then we'll make our own world. The rangers will keep hunting, the army, they never forget. Then we'll keep running, together. He was quiet so long she thought he'd fallen asleep. Then he spoke softly in Comanche. She'd learned enough to understand, I love you beyond words, beyond worlds, beyond time. Show me, she whispered. When you're stronger, show me this love that's worth everything. His arms tightened around her. Promise and possession. Outside, someone began singing, a lullaby or prayer, beautiful in its sadness. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The Mexican government barely tolerated their presence. Food was scarce. The old ways were dying. But tonight, Maggie Sullivan, fugitive, outcast, woman in love, lay in the arms of the man she'd chosen above all else. The world might call her traitor, fool. Worse, let them. She'd found something worth more than approval or ease. A love that transcended boundaries, that made the impossible possible. The path had divided, and she'd chosen the harder way. But as Joseph's breathing deepened into healing sleep, his heartbeat steady beneath her hand, Maggie knew she'd choose it again, and again, and again. Some things were worth any price. Some loves were worth any sacrifice. And some freedoms could only be found by those brave enough to lose everything else in the search. Months passed in the mountain refuge. Joseph grew stronger, his wound finally healing clean. Maggie learned the rhythms of Comanche life, not the savage existence she'd been taught to expect, but a complex culture adapting to an impossible situation. She helped Maria with daily tasks, learned to prepare buffalo hide when the rare animal was taken, gathered medicinal plants with the healer. Her hands grew harder, her Spanish improved, and she even picked up enough Comanche to understand conversations around the evening fires. But peace was fragile. Mexican soldiers came periodically, demanding to know their intentions. Each time, gifts were exchanged, promises made to cause no trouble. Each time, the welcome grew thinner. One morning, Grey Wolf called a council. The adults gathered while children played nearby, unaware their future was being decided. We cannot stay, Grey Wolf said bluntly. Mexico tolerates us now, but for how long? And our young men grow restless. Some speak of returning north, raiding for honor and horses. That's suicide, Joseph argued. He'd regained much of his strength, but would always carry a slight limp from his ordeal. The army waits for any excuse to finish us. Then what? Swift Elk's brother, Running River, demanded. Do we fade away like shadows? Forget who we are? The argument continued in circles, the same one that had plagued them for years. Adapt or resist. Surrender or die fighting. There were no good answers. That night, Maggie and Joseph sat apart from the others, watching stars appear over the mountains. She leaned against him, feeling the steady beat of his heart. What are you thinking? She asked. That I'm selfish. He pulled her closer. I should want you to go back, beg forgiveness, reclaim your life. This is my life. A hard life, uncertain. You could still... She silenced him with a kiss. Could still what? Marry that lieutenant? Pretend I never loved you? Live half alive? She touched his face. I made my choice. Stop trying to unmake it for me. He caught her hand, pressing it to his cheek. You humble me. Margaret Sullivan. Good. You need humbling sometimes. They made love under the stars, careful of his still tender side but desperate for connection. Afterward, they lay entwined, planning impossible futures. We could go deeper into Mexico, Maggie suggested. Find work on a ranch. You know horses better than anyone. A Comanche working for wages. He shook his head. And they would never accept you with me. Then we'll keep going. California, maybe. Start fresh where no one knows us. Running forever, living forever, together. He was quiet, then spoke carefully. There is another way. Some of my people have gone to the reservation. It's not the life we knew, but... No, her voice was firm. I won't see you caged. Rather die free than live penned. My brave one. He kissed her forehead. Then we run. But first, I have something to ask the council. The next evening, Joseph stood before the gathered band. He spoke formally in Comanche, and though Maggie caught only pieces, she understood from Maria's smile that something momentous was happening. Grey Wolf responded at length, then turned to Maggie. In careful English, he asked, You would bind yourself to this man? Know that among us, marriage is not your white ceremony. It is a promise before the spirits, before the people. Breaking it brings shame to all. I understand, Maggie said clearly. I would be honored. The old healer woman stepped forward, studying Maggie with clouded eyes that seemed to see everything. She spoke rapidly to Joseph, who translated. Grandmother asks if you carry his child yet. Heat flooded Maggie's cheeks. Not yet. The old woman cackled, saying something that made others laugh. Joseph's translation was diplomatic. She says we should work harder at it. The ceremony was simple. They stood before the band while Grey Wolf spoke blessings. Maria helped Maggie into a borrowed doeskin dress, beautiful with beadwork. Joseph wore his finest shirt, the one he'd kept through everything. They exchanged gifts. He gave her a knife with an intricately carved handle. She gave him her father's compass. So we always find our way. She whispered. The band feasted on what little they had, sharing stories and songs. For one night, the weight of the world lifted. Maggie danced with the women, awkward but trying. Joseph watched with eyes that promised forever. But forever was challenged at dawn. A rider approached, Rodrigo's nephew, exhausted from hard travel. His news shattered their brief peace. Rangers, he gasped. Many Rangers. They pressure the Mexican government, say harboring you is act of war. The soldiers come tomorrow to arrest or drive you out. The band erupted in alarm. Where could they go? Further south meant unknown territory, hostile tribes. North meant certain death. Joseph pulled Maggie aside. You could stay with Rodrigo. Say I forced you, held you captive. We've had this conversation. The answer hasn't changed. Maggie, where you go, I go. That was the promise. Before your people, before the spirits. She gripped his hands. Don't dishonor me by asking me to break it. Grey Wolf made the decision. They would scatter. Small groups had better chances than one large band. Some would try for the Yaqui lands to the south. Others would risk returning north, hoping to blend with reservation populations. And us? Joseph asked. The old leader smiled sadly. You follow your own path. It was always going to be so. They left that night. Joseph, Maggie, and 6 others, including Maria and Running River. Their plan was desperate. Reach the coast. Find passage on a ship to California. It meant crossing hostile territory, avoiding both Mexican and American forces, surviving on hope and wit. The journey was brutal. They moved at night, hid by day. Water was scarce, food scarcer. Maggie learned to ignore hunger, to push through exhaustion. When Maria fell ill with fever, Maggie nursed her as she'd been nursed, using precious water and medicine. 2 weeks in, they encountered a Mexican patrol. Running River wanted to fight, but Joseph counseled patience. They hid in a narrow canyon while soldiers passed within yards of their position. Maggie held her breath, hand on her rifle, ready to die fighting if discovered. They weren't. The patrol moved on, and they continued their desperate flight west. The coast, when they finally saw it, seemed like a miracle. The endless blue of the Pacific stretched to the horizon, promising escape. In a fishing village, Joseph traded their last horses for passage on a merchant ship heading to San Francisco. The captain, a weathered Portuguese who asked no questions, gave them space in the hold. As Mexico faded behind them, Maggie stood at the rail with Joseph, watching their past disappear. "Regrets?" he asked. She thought of her mother, Danny, the ranch she'd never see again, the simple life she'd once expected. Then she looked at Joseph, scarred, hunted, but hers, and shook her head. "None. You? Only that I cannot give you the life you deserve. You give me the only life I want." She leaned into him. "Free, together. The rest we'll figure out." Running River joined them, speaking in Comanche to Joseph, who smiled and translated. "He says the spirits favor the brave and the foolish. We are both, so we should do well." Maggie laughed, the sound carrying across the water. Behind them lay Texas, Mexico, and the world that said their love was impossible. Ahead lay California and the unknown, challenges certainly, but also possibility. As stars emerged over the Pacific, she and Joseph stood together, two souls who'd found each other against all odds. The Apache girl who'd given Maggie the beaded band couldn't have known she was weaving destinies together. Colonel Harrison couldn't have known his pursuit would only strengthen their bond. Even Grey Wolf couldn't have foreseen that sometimes. The path forward required leaving everything behind. The ship creaked beneath them, carrying them toward tomorrow. Whatever waited in California, gold fields or prejudice, opportunity or obstacles, they'd face it together. Not as white woman and Comanche warrior, but as Maggie and Joseph, bound by choice and love and the courage to chase freedom wherever it led. The west wind filled the sails, bearing them toward a new dawn. And somewhere in that wind, Maggie thought she heard drums, not war drums, but celebration, the heartbeat of survival, the rhythm of hope, the song of two hearts that refused to be divided by the arbitrary lines others drew. Their story was far from over. In truth, it was just beginning. But that's a tale for another night, another fire, another telling. For now, know that love found a way, as it always does for those brave enough to follow where it leads. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I'd love to know where in the world you're enjoying these tales of the American frontier. Please leave a comment below sharing your location and thoughts on Maggie and Joseph's journey. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel for more authentic stories of love, adventure, and survival in the Old West. Your support means everything, and I can't wait to share more incredible tales with you. Happy trails, partners!